Welcome to Virtual Tour Stop 10, our final stop. Now, at our last stop, we had the climax of the battle, the biggest portion of the most intense fighting going on at the third line. But the battle isn't over yet. Like I mentioned at the previous stop, Cornwallis hears heavy firing going on to the south and he has no idea what's going on. So from that position, he has sent Bannister Tarleton with some of his cavalry to come over here where we are to investigate what's going on. Now, what he's going to find is actually about a half-mile south of where we are in modern-day Country Park. And in Country Park, what he would have found is the Regiment von Bose and the 1st Guards Battalion nearly being surrounded in the woods. Now remember, back to tour stops 3 and 4, what's going on this south side of the battlefield is that first you had the 1st Guards wandering off on their own, and then after von Bose routed part of the Virginia militia, both battalions now wander off to the south, essentially pursuing the units that were right in front of them. What had happened while the main battle was going up the New Garden Road was that they essentially had a kind of accordion-like battle. They would fire, attack, the militia would disperse, but while they have to reform their lines because they've gotten disorganized from their bayonet attack, the militia aren't leaving the battlefield. They're coming back, and they're slowly creeping in around the flanks, a little bit more and a little bit more. By the time Tarleton gets out here to find out what's going on, what he finds is 2 battalions nearly surrounded by the militia. And as a matter of fact, Regiment von Bose has had to split itself in half. What they did was that the left side of their line didn't about face and then marched out to face the threat that's coming in behind them. So they've nearly been surrounded by militiamen, and what the militia are also doing to continue to win this fight is that they'll take pot shots at the British and Hessian soldiers, but then they'll go back down a very distinct rise that's out in that area. They'll go back down below where they can't be seen by those British and Hessian soldiers on the high ground, reload, come back up the rise, fire again, go back down again. So when Tarleton gets out to that part of the battlefield, what he sees are 2 units that have been fighting for nearly 2 hours now, have been nearly surrounded, and are desperate to get out of that situation. One thing that's going to help Tarleton disperse the militia from this area is that Light Horse Harry Lee is no longer down here. Lee heard the major fighting going on up by the courthouse, so he has taken his cavalry off to investigate what's going on. When he gets there, he's going to find the British swarming the area and leave the battlefield. But when he leaves at that precise moment, he is leaving all the militia unguarded for Tarleton to sweep in and drive them off, and that's exactly what he does. When he gets up here, he asks the 2 battalions in this area to fire off a grand volley, not only to give a shock value to this attack, but it's also providing a little bit of a smokescreen. They deliver that grand volley, Tarleton's cavalry go charging through, they disperse the Virginia militia, and that's what finally ends the battle, and finally ends all the fighting at Guilford Courthouse on that day, sometime between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon of March 15th, 1781. Now the monument behind me, that depicts Joseph Winston. Winston was a militia commander here. Some of his men would have been a part of that separate fight that goes on about a half-mile south of here. Cold rains are going to return that afternoon as Americans head for their camp on Troublesome Creek, and the British are going to camp on the battlefield. Cornwallis will state that all the buildings within a 6 to 8 mile radius become hospitals in the days that follow the battle. In terms of casualties, the British lost 532 men. That's about 28% of Cornwallis's force. The Americans lose over 300, about 8%. They lose what we estimate to be about 1,000 in terms of missing, but we chalk that up to militiamen who left the battlefield. We don't count them as casualties because a lot of these guys are going to come back to fight in later campaigns, and a large portion of the North Carolina militia who fled the battlefield are actually going to be forced to serve as Continentals in South Carolina, because that was a part of North Carolina militia law at the time, was that if you left before you were given permission or before you were given a discharge, your punishment was that you could be forced into the Continental line. 2 days after the battle, after declaring a great victory won, Cornwallis and the British leave for Wilmington, where they hoped to resupply. When the campaign began, Cornwallis had sent troops there to extend the supply line inland along the Cape Fear River, but they had failed to get out of the town due to militia harassment. Cornwallis now has a 180-mile journey with exhausted troops to try and reach his supply point. Greene's American army will briefly pursue them to the Cape Fear River, but ultimately turn south into South Carolina.